Good morning and welcome to the Oregon Conservation Partnership webinar. This is part of a monthly series, and today's presentation will be on publicizing your work with free PR from the partnership. My name is Anna Freitas. I'm the Policy and Program Manager with the Oregon Association of Conservation Districts, and I'll be the facilitator today, keeping an eye on questions and relaying those to our presenter, Natalie Bennon. These webinars are a forum for watershed councils, soil and water conservation districts, and land trusts to learn about something that's important to them. They can range from PR to administrative information, how to get grants, that kind of thing, and some on-the-ground work information as well. The webinars are offered in support with support from the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, and we sincerely thank them for helping us bring this valuable content to you all. We have 21 people registered for the webinar today, and we are really happy to have all of you on the webinar today. In a minute, I'm going to hand the webinar over to our presenter, Natalie Bennon, but first there are a couple housekeeping items that you should know. First, everyone but the panelists and myself are muted by default. There are a couple of ways that you can interact during and after the webinar. Throughout the presentation, you can type in a question, and we'll find a good place to pause so Natalie can answer those for you. At the end of the presentation, you can type in a question again, or you can raise your little hand icon and I'll unmute you so you can ask the question directly. There's one handout. If you look on your control panel, you can download Natalie's presentation, her PowerPoint slides, or you can look at those later when they're posted on the Oregon Conservation Partnership website, along with the recording of this webinar. Finally, there is a short survey at the end of this webinar. And we would really appreciate you taking a minute to answer that, give us some feedback, and maybe suggest some future topics. And again, the webinar will be recorded, so feel free to share it with others who you think will be interested. Okay, let's get started. Natalie, I'll hand it over to you now. And there you go.
Hi, I'm Natalie. I have no idea who exactly is on the phone, but hopefully some of you have heard already about this media support that the Oregon Conservation Partnership provides with help from OWEB. And a little bit about me is that I've been doing public relations specifically for maybe 5 years, and currently I work for GUARD Communications. And one of the clients I work on is you, members of the Oregon Conservation Partnership. But I've been doing this work with the partnership for about 3 years. And before that, I worked for a small environmental nonprofit. Before that, I worked for the Nature Conservancy as a grant writer. Before that, I was a journalist covering federal environmental policy. So I have a pretty significant background in communications around the kind of work you do. And I think that that's helpful so that, you know, I can have a good base for understanding what you're trying to do in your communities. Next slide. So we're going to talk mostly today about earned media. And I thought I'd, explain what that is. There are a lot of different ways to look at it, to look at communications. It's definitely an art, there's some science to it, but mostly it's an art. And I look at the buckets as paid, social, owned media, which is like your blog, website, newsletter, that sort of thing, anything that you have total control over. and then earned media. And earned media would be quotes or mentions in news articles, opportunities to speak or appear on TV or radio. And then we'll get to a slide later that talks also about the opinion page, which is another form of earned media. So sources of earned media can be either traditional media or non-traditional media would include blogs or podcasts, online videos, social media, but again, that gets into a little bit of a different bucket, but sometimes it edges over into earned media. Generally, if you work with me, we're working on traditional media, but there are ways that the content you develop for the media, for traditional media, can be used in other venues like blogs or podcasts. Well, probably not podcasts, but blogs or social media, newsletter, that sort of thing. And the reason we focus on earned media is because it offers third-party credibility in a way that most other media do not. So if a news organization thinks that your story is worth writing, then it's already cleared a hurdle of a certain amount of credibility, a certain amount of newsworthiness or story value is already conferred upon that information. It also offers credibility with decision makers and voters who have a lot of influence over public funding. So if your organization or your projects are seen as credible, they get that extra credibility by being published or aired on news media, then we can then send that information to decision makers or voters themselves have seen it. And if you build up enough of that, it provides some goodwill that hopefully develops later into policies or more funding that benefit you. Also, generally, I think most of your organizations are interested in having a little bit more awareness among community members of what you do and why and how it benefits them. I know that a lot of people don't necessarily see the value of protecting natural areas, and so when you show them exactly what you're doing or how you're restoring an area or enhancing a resource, and then you show the community how that benefits them, that later helps you in terms of making the case that your organization is worthy of more funding or volunteers, that sort of thing, or more participation from landowners. Earned media also offers you the opportunity to position yourself as an expert in your community or in the state or among your professional groups on certain issues. And when you get earned media placements, when you get articles and news segments aired about you, journalists see that. And so it tends to be a snowball where there's more journalists might call you in the future because they see you as someone who can talk about a certain issue. And then same thing at the bottom, it just increases beneficial relationships with journalists for future stories. So I'll go to the next slide now. I think it's helpful to consider not just your own goals, but what are the goals of journalists when they're looking for stories or when they're writing stories or producing stories. They want to deliver what they at least think that their audience wants to know. They also want to increase viewers, listeners, and readers. So the more interesting they think the story is, the more they think their audience will think it's interesting. They want to tell accurate stories. They try their best. They want to gain concise, credible, newsworthy information. They want to get the whole story, so it's helpful if you do your homework ahead of time to make their jobs easier, and that means developing materials that will be helpful for them. Either maybe it's a press release or maybe it's just some written context in an email. Having photos or videos ready for them that can be used in their articles or news segments, and also having other experts ready to talk to them if they want to pursue the story. They're going to need more people to talk to than just you usually, and so it's helpful if you've lined up people that you think would be helpful. Again, they want to retain reliable experts, so that's you helping them by giving expert information, and also by providing contact information for other people that might help. And then lastly, unfortunately, news is often about drama or conflict. And I know that most partnership members are trying to reduce the drama and the conflict in natural resource issues and natural resource projects, natural resource challenges. So I think this is a challenge that you all face, that you don't want the story to be presented as huge conflict and drama. But if it is, then how do you tell your story as part of the solution and people working together? Recognizing, though, that that's going to reduce the long-term news value, honestly. Do we want to take any questions yet, or should I keep going?
Yeah, we have a question. What is a good way to determine if a project is large or valuable enough to reach a level of credibility worth going out for earned media?
That's a good question, and I have a slide on that. I think maybe one or two more slides. I'll present information about what is news, what's newsworthy, what are journalists looking for. So just hold off a moment. So the theory of change in me working with the partnership is that we would talk together, you and I would talk about potential stories you have going on. And I'll also explain later what some examples are of those stories that we've done already, or that could be stories in the future. So if we think we have a story that we want to tell that we think would be newsworthy, then we'll develop the assets for that. We might develop a press release. We might just develop some written materials to give the reporter background. We might, share a report or some sort of other document that supports what you're saying, photos, video if you have it, and other people to talk to. And then I will pitch it to a reporter. Hopefully the reporter's interested, calls you. Sometimes they just print press release, but usually, hopefully, they actually go a little deeper and call you and ask more questions, get more information, publish a story or air it if it's TV or radio. And then at that point, you're still not done. You have a lot of material that you can use. First of all, you can use the materials we've developed in other communications channels on your own, social, a newsletter, that sort of thing. But when the story's published, you can post it on social media, you can share it with members via email or a newsletter. And then also, the partnership will work with you to make sure it's shared with relevant decision makers in your community. They might be county commissioners, they might be state elected officials, they might be federal elected officials, they might be leaders in your community, like Farm Bureau leaders or things like that. Anybody that you think should know about this article. And then the idea is that eventually that develops into more public support for your work, and that might be through policies, funding, or potentially other vehicles as well. So this is the slide that will hopefully answer the question that was just asked. What is news, or what kind of stories do journalists want? So news is usually new. You want to check off as many of these boxes as you can, essentially. And the more boxes you check off, the more newsworthy it is. So if it's new, if it just happened today, yesterday, or quite recently, that's news value. If it's unusual, then that's also news value. If it's something that doesn't happen quite often, maybe a lot of people coming together to work collaboratively can be unusual. Or a certain solution offered to a problem that's never been used before, that could be an unusual story. If it's also new, then that's higher news value, but even if it's old, the unusual factor can still get you news coverage. Is it interesting or significant? So is there a significant amount of money being spent? That's always, especially because it's usually public money, that's always worth, newsworthy. Is there a significant or interesting person, like a celebrity or a local business leader, or kids being involved, or anything like that where you don't have the usual players involved, or maybe you have somebody who just has a really high profile in your area. And then finally, things that are about people are more newsworthy. And I think that conservationists have gotten a lot better at talking about how their work is really about people. But this is a challenge, and it's one you really have to almost always figure out in order for a story to have news value. So does that answer the question? I think maybe the next, no, that's an example. I have another slide that has examples too of potential stories. But feel free to probe more if I didn't answer the question. This is an example I'm going to show you of a series of articles that was published in 2018, actually, the first year I was working with Partnership. And I don't remember how I became aware of this story, but the Wasco Soil and Water Conservation District had gotten a significant chunk of money from the Water Resources Department to work on a project to address their well water issues, their aquifer issues, but also study it to see if this potential solution actually does solve the problem or work over time. So local media did not know about it. The district, of course, everybody's working as hard as they can and as much as they can, and had not had enough time to really get the word out publicly, not just beyond their community of conservation workers, but also, in the farmers and orchardists that they were working with. So I did not write a press release because the project was so complicated that I was worried it would take months for us to get it right. I simply sent an email to Nita Cecil of the Dallas Chronicle explaining what was going on and lining up the people that she should talk to. One of them was at the Wasco Soil and Water Conservation District, Shyla Olson. And I went from there, and she wrote 3 articles. One was about the well being filled. One was about the long history of Mosher's water problems, which was really useful, I think. And one was about the new wells being drilled, and then all the research and monitoring they're going to be doing to see how that goes. So that was a real positive outcome. And you can get in touch with Shyla. We were hoping that she would join us today, but I think she would be happy to speak about lessons learned about working with me or how it was helpful. But these articles did help them get a lot more visibility in the work they're doing. So here are some more examples of stories. If my job is to help you tell your story to journalists. First, we have to find the story. And I understand that that's not always possible. And I think the easiest way to do it is to just call me or email me, and I'll ask you questions. And you could even, we could even do this every 3 to 6 months for 15 to 30 minutes and see what's happening that's new or significant. And I can tell you if I think there's a story there. Honestly, with other clients, we have, frequent calls where we're checking in and learning about what is happening in their organizations that might be newsworthy, and then we go from there. You can look at upcoming construction projects. Construction projects are usually newsworthy, especially for local papers. What are people going to be seeing this summer that's significant? What's going to change in the community? You can also follow the money. So if you have secured a significant amount of funding, or if a partner secured a significant amount of funding for a project too, is also, we can work with that. That's newsworthy. You can follow up, I think, with direct beneficiaries. I think that organizations are doing a lot of monitoring and research of what happens after they do projects, because they're often required to under the grants that they get. So if you hear from certain people in your community that there are, certain things happening that are really long-term benefits or even short-term from a project, that could be newsworthy. You could tell the story of how this project came to be, how you implemented it, and then the other person who's beneficiary, maybe a farmer or a rancher or an angler or any sort of, user or a community member with a well, anything like that, or a city that, benefited in some way from this public project. What were the benefits and how can you tell that story? Data, again, you're doing a lot of monitoring, and I think most of the time it's not that interesting, but maybe you're seeing trends over time or really interesting results that should be told. And then another example I've noticed is there are frequently reports coming out that 90% of them aren't that interesting at all, but a few of them are going to be really interesting because the state's going to have to address an issue like water in Southeast Oregon or in Harney County, or tide gates. We're going to work with some of the coastal partnership members to talk about what kind of investment is going to need to happen soon, because I think there's a report coming out this year about all the tide gates that are really failing, and it's an infrastructure issue. And failing infrastructure, that's a drama conflict story that media is probably going to be interested in. But partnership members can insert themselves into that story as, potential, they're problem solvers. They're going to help solve these problems and figure out how to do so in the most efficient and effective way possible. So we would find a story together, work together to write a pitch and or press release. And when I say pitch, I just mean an email basically, or sort of a phone script, if we call, to a reporter where you're, laying out in just a few sentences what you think is a story, why they should cover it. Also, we'll gather photos and videos, or I'll ask you for photos and videos and hope that you have them or can secure some, or, sometimes a news organization will really be able to go out and take their own pictures, which is the best case scenario, but is often not happening because there aren't enough journalists in the world. So hopefully I pitch it to the journalist and the journalist calls you, and then there's a story. I want to make sure we talk about one other sort of different option for getting earned media, which is the opinion page. I think that this is an often underutilized resource, and it's easier in my experience to get media placed on the opinion page than it is to get a reporter interested in writing something. And that's largely because you write the content, or I write the content and you edit it. So you're providing free content for the newspaper. They might not accept it. They might decide that it doesn't work for their paper. But I have, working with the partnership, we've had a lot of positive experience getting op-eds placed. So I might call them commentary pieces, guest editorials, op-eds, opinion pieces. There are basically three things that get published on an opinion page. One is a longer form opinion written by someone in the community. One is a letter to editor, which is shorter. The longer pieces are usually 500 to 800 words. The shorter pieces are like 200 to 350. And then the third option is to pitch an editorial, and this is harder, but an opinion page editor or editorial board, sometimes they have multiple, might be interested in writing their own piece about an issue that's important in their community. So you would work with me to set up a meeting with the opinion editor, meet with them, pitch them on why they should write about it, and then hopefully they say yes and they write about it. But this is the highest bar. It's not usually a route I take, but sometimes it's good, sometimes it works. Usually what I recommend is an op-ed, the first bullet, and then maybe a couple letters to the editor by supporters. So examples of that are, recently we had, I worked with one of the partnership members, which is the Coalition Oregon Land Trust, and they had voices at REI and Keene who were willing to sign their names to an op-ed we wrote about the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And this provides funding for that largely land trusts, but also state agencies use to conserve public parks, or land trusts use them mostly to conserve forests through the Forest Legacy Program, I think. Anyway, it provides great value for outdoor recreation businesses. So having an outdoor recreation business voice on this made a lot of sense. And then we also had, a piece published in the Bend Bulletin from the Deschutes Land Trust and Roughware. But one thing I work on every spring with partnership members is op-eds or letters to the editor about the Pacific Coast Salmon Recovery Fund. As most of you probably know, it's a federal fund that provides, I think it's roughly a third of OEB funding. It provides a lot of the funding that goes towards the projects that all of you do to enhance, restore, or protect salmon habitat. So this op-ed was in Wallowa County Chieftain about why Congress should fully fund the Pacific Coast Salmon Recovery Fund. And we need this every spring, because every spring partnership members and OWEB and usually a tribal representative is going to DC to ask Congress to fully fund the Salmon Recovery Fund. So it's really helpful for them to have published opinion pieces that they can take to congressional members and say, look, your members say they need this, please help us. Are there any questions thus far before I move into takeaways?
Could you talk a little more about kind of the benefits of visual supplements, those photos and videos, and maybe what makes for a good photo?
Sure. In my experience, you always want to have a photo ready, or at least one photo ready, or that you can access, somehow fairly quickly for a journalist. They really don't want to publish something in the paper that's all text. Even for opinion pages, it's helpful if you have some sort of photo that can accompany your piece. They will often find one themselves. And the opinion piece that was in the Bend Bulletin recently was not a good photo to accompany the piece, and I'm kicking myself for not remembering to have something for them. But sometimes mistakes are made. So a photo of a beautiful area that's really affected by whatever opinion you're talking about. Sometimes with the Pacific Coast Salmon Recovery Fund, they'll just, stick in a photo from ODSW of some coho spawning in a river. And if it's about your project, I would recommend photos with people in them. So like the Mosier project, they didn't take a picture just of the well being dug. They took a picture of a guy standing next to the machine that's digging starting the well. They took a picture of, a person who was helping fill the old wells, that sort of thing. So you really want to try to have people in them too. You don't have to have video, but if you have video, that's helpful, especially for TV news, because many of you are in rural areas where TV news crews are not going to come. But if you have, sometimes they can use just photos. If you have video, though, that also accompanies, they might be able to use some of that in a segment. Does that help?
Yeah, great. Thank you. And then we have a question, kind of a broad question. Does this apply to participants in the Oregon conservation community who are not members of the partnership? Consultants, for example.
What was the last part? Consultant example?
Consultants are an example of participants in the community
Gotcha.
who are not members but are closely connected.
I guess that would depend. I think that you should get in touch with the partnership and maybe me as well and ask, and we can explore it, because there might if there's a logical connection for how the goals of the partnership are advanced, then I think that the answer probably would be yes. Anything else?
Yeah, I have a question about the op-eds.
Okay.
When do you reach out to someone outside of the organization? So you mentioned Keen as one.
Mm-hmm.
When would you do that, and what makes for a good author versus just writing it as a district manager, that kind of thing?
Yeah, great question. I think that the more, first of all, sometimes district managers or, watershed council coordinators or directors are the perfect people to speak. But we always want to explore, what are all the options? There's that option. There's sometimes a board member might be a good option, or sometimes someone else in the community. So if there's someone else in the community who has a high profile and can speak to how the issue affects them, I think that that's really more valuable. It's, again, that third-party credibility, showing how the work you're doing or the policy you're advancing or, you know, the whatever opinion you're taking, how, if that opinion, if that proposal is adopted, you know, how does that benefit the broader community? Well, for Keene and REI, it benefits, you know, they're very active in efforts to conserve natural spaces and outdoor recreational areas because it's, you know, a clear connection to their business goals, right? So it made a lot of sense for that business voice to be giving the message, and it makes it more interesting from a newspaper's perspective. I think that potentially the opinion piece could have been still published if, you know, the land trust and I don't know, maybe the Coalition of Oregon Land Trust had authored it, but that's a really logical, you know, direct beneficiary, right, from funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. If you can show broader benefits or broader beneficiaries of the work, then, and you're showing that coalition that, you know, cares about what you're doing, that's more persuasive. Yeah, so we can, you know, and oftentimes like a farmer or a rancher in a community might be the best person to say that. Another thing I look for is who are the more like the not usual suspects, you know, the maybe more conservative people in the community that support what you're doing. That sometimes plays better and might influence more people. So that sort of thing.
Great, thank you. Those are all the questions for now.
Okay. Well, let's see. So quick takeaways. When you're looking at a story, again, you can simply call me or email me and propose ideas and we can talk about them. But these are generally the screens that journalists are running ideas through. Is it new? Is it unusual? Is it interesting or significant? And is it about people? And then the options for telling your story through me are usually newspaper, radio, TV, magazines, online news, or the opinion page. I'm also really interested in exploring the podcasting, but I haven't really figured out when it makes sense or where there's a story that's relevant enough for podcast audience. And then I wrote a little glossary because sometimes I use, you know, 2 or 3 words to describe essentially the same thing, and I wanted people to know what I mean. And then there's my contact info. So really, especially in 2019, the partnership really didn't use me as a resource as much as they could have. So it is entirely okay for you to just reach out directly to me and ask me questions or brainstorm ideas with me, or, you know, touch base, or ask me to touch base with you every couple months. I'm happy to make myself a reminder and send you a quick email every couple months if you want me to remind you, hey, you know, what are you working on? And let's talk about stories. That's all. So happy to take more questions.
Great, thank you, Natalie. So at this point,
yeah.
If you have a question, if anyone in the audience has a question, you can either raise your hand and I'll unmute you, or you can type it in as you were doing earlier in the presentation.
While we, I guess, wait for potential questions, one thing that that I'll be working on in the spring a lot, it tends to be that the work I do for you guys is heaviest in the spring because the spring round of OWEB grants come out. So I'm looking at that whole list and identifying projects that I think will be newsworthy. I might reach out to some of you if you have a significant amount of money that you got, or a significant number of acres you're working on, or something like that, or unusual project, something new that OWEB's funding. Those would all be things that I'm looking at to see if I think that we should explore a story. But if you have a project that's likely to be funded this spring that you think and that you want to get more attention on, please reach out and let me know and we can talk about it, because I might not notice what's unique or newsworthy about your story just by looking at the OWEB list. And then another thing is the Pacific Coast Salmon Recovery Fund. If you get, funds for working on anything that benefits salmon, funds from OWEB, let me know, because I would really like to work with you on a letter to the editor or an opinion piece in your local or regional paper. And I do most of the work. It's really pretty painless.
Great. There aren't any questions, so I think we'll wrap things up. Thank you so much, Natalie, for sharing this really important information with us, and for all the work you do for the partners and our members. We know the PR work is really important for continuing the work that all our members do. Thank you also.
I'm happy to do it.
Yeah. Thank you also to our sponsors again, the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, and thank you to our audience for chiming in and asking good questions. The presentation recording and the PowerPoint will be on the Conservation Partnership website, so you all can take a look at that awesome glossary that Natalie provided and contact her. Don't forget to take the survey at the end of this presentation. When you close the window, it should just pop up, or it will show up in your email. And then join us next month on March 19th. Bobby Riggers from OWEB will present the Clone Wars, Win When Reporting Restoration Projects in the Oregon Watershed Restoration Inventory. With that, thank you all again, and hopefully I'll see you next month.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Natalie.